The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight on The Agenda, John Michael McGrath and I with our weekly On Poly podcast. I'm trying to think now, who rejected some of the ideas that were in the Progressive Conservative Zone Housing Task Force?
That would be the Progressive Conservative government itself.
That's right. I think you're right about that. Then,
when you think about young children and how they learn, it's all through curiosity.
When I was growing up, I thought a fish was sleeping.
They're curious about the world. They want to explore the world. They want to touch and feel and make sense of the world.
welcome everyone to the On Poly podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, Bonnie Crombie's Big Week, making headlines on housing, climate and tax policy, and a wish list for next week's Ontario budget.
And I talk a little bit about a phrase Bonnie Crombie's been using a lot lately.
Wonder what that could be. It is March 22nd, 2024, so let's get to it. Hey, partner. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Okay, we are going to start how we always start, it seems, because we seem to have a continuation of themes from previous episodes of this podcast.
Yes, indeed.
Now, I recall for the last couple of weeks, you've been repping stuff having to do with the solar system.
Yeah, whimsical, scientific, space stuff.
Yeah, dealing with planets. And I noticed today that you are riffing on that theme, but not quite. And it's in French, so maybe for those who don't speak, you want to translate?
So this is both a reference to a Magritte painting, famously the Ceci n'est pas un pipe, this is not a pipe painting, but it is also a Star Wars reference, Ceci n'est pas une lune, this is not a moon, or more colloquially for those who remember Star Wars, that's no moon.
Which Obi-Wan Kenobi said in Episode 4, A New Hope.
Yes, when he saw the Death Star for the first time.
Death Star, very good.
Yes.
Very Star Wars nerdy, perfectly on brand for John Michael McGrath.
Absolutely.
I, on the other hand, am continuing the, how will we say, the sort of geographic look at the province of Ontario, because last week I had on something that said Highway 69,
yes,
which is the highway you take to get from Toronto up through Parry Sound, eventually to Sudbury. And you know how much I love Northern Ontario, so here we go again. 17 North, which is the highway, I think it basically starts at Nipigon, goes west to North Bay, continuing along Dryden, and then eventually Kenora. So it sort of goes west and north through northwestern Ontario, and well, what's not to love here? So there we go.
That is a part of the province I've never actually been to.
Oh.
I've never been to the northwest.
Gotta go.
Yeah.
Thunder Bay, especially, Sleeping Giant, gorgeous, just beautiful sunrises.
It is definitely on my to-do list, but you know.
Okay, well, don't do it yet because we got a podcast to do.
Oh,
okay?
Yeah, okay.
So let's get to that. Issue 1, here we go. Okay, the carbon tax and rebate plan. I'm calling it the carbon tax and rebate plan because it's not just a tax, it's also a rebate.
You get some money back.
Everybody forgets that. But anyway, the carbon tax and rebate plan is, of course, a federal initiative of Justin Trudeau's government, but its political consequences have been percolating at Queen's Park for the past couple of weeks. Premier Doug Ford, as we know, has upped the rhetoric against the carbon pricing policy, and he's tried to squeeze the new Liberal leader, Bonnie Crombie, on the measure, in effect trying to force Crombie to publicly disagree with her federal leader. And for a while, it worked. Crombie's initial statements about what she'd do on this issue were not at all clear, but this week, significant clarification. The Ontario Liberals will strike a blue ribbon panel of experts to offer advice on how the Grits should handle this issue if they ever get to form a government. And particularly noteworthy, Crombie has taken a future or potential carbon tax off the table. Okay, tell us more.
So this will be a panel chaired by the Beaches East York Liberal MPP, Mary Margaret McMahon. Let's jump right to, she did tell us on Monday that the provincial Liberals still support the federal Liberals and want to see them reelected. And I mentioned that because, of course, this is only an issue if Justin Trudeau or another carbon tax supporting party forms government after the next election.
Which is not Pierre Poilievre's party.
Precisely, and he has been leading in the polls for many months now. And so this basic question is, like, will this policy still even exist by the next provincial election? Because, of course, there has to be a federal election before the next provincial election. If Crombie is not backing away from the federal Liberal Party, she is certainly backing away from the carbon tax, and more than just backing away, running.
Which we hasten to add she is legally allowed to do. I mean, all provinces are. The federal law says that a carbon tax only applies if there is no provincial climate change plan in place. And Crombie has said she is going to come up with her own climate change, carbon pricing, however you work it, plan. So there's nothing illegal about what she said. I think we should establish that. Anyway, we're talking difference. Last week we were talking about differences between the federal and provincial Conservatives, and there were some significant differences and no love lost there on a few things. But here we are a week later talking about some significant policy differences between the federal Liberals and provincial Liberals. So this all really is a reminder of one of my favorite expressions in politics, which is where you stand depends on where you sit.
Yes.
Very true. Anyway, here's what Bonnie Crombie had to say about all this at a press conference she had on Tuesday, this past Tuesday.
I'm not here to tell them how to do their job. I'm here to create a plan that's right for Ontarians. And quite frankly, this is just another opportunity. Like Doug Ford is trying to distract from the fact that he doesn't have a plan. We are going to have a plan, and it will be a very innovative plan. We will make polluters pay, but we won't add additional tax burden to Ontarians because we know they can't handle more taxes at this time.
There's the Liberal leader from earlier this week. Now, let's circle back to the question of what Ontario is either obliged or not obliged to do. We have to keep in mind that Ontarians right now pay the federal carbon tax because Premier Doug Ford cancelled the previous government's Made in Ontario cap and trade plan, and that plan raised billions of dollars for the Ontario Treasury. So we got to remember, had that cap and trade plan not been cancelled by the current government, Ontarians would not be paying the carbon tax. That's on Premier Ford, which is kind of ironic, no?
Yes, very much so. And, this is an issue where, I think there's been some criticism of Crombie, as some people have, asserted that, she's pulling the Liberals away from climate policy. And that's a debatable proposition. I do think that, at least in principle, it is possible that a Liberal government, or even before the next election, the Liberal Party could make a serious proposal that complied with the principles of the federal climate plan that didn't necessarily involve a carbon tax, right? The consumer-facing carbon tax is just one side of climate policy, and depending on who you ask, it may not even be the one that's doing most of the work in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So, Crombie's announcement this week doesn't necessarily rule out climate policy or even ambitious climate policy. She is just clearly staking out what is not on the menu.
Exactly. All right, on to issue 2. Now, we're going to stay with the Liberals here because the party made several announcements this past week. This next one we'll talk about is about housing. It is called the Build Ontario Act. And BUILD is actually not only the name of the act, it's also an acronym. BUILD. So take us through it, JMN.
So the Build Ontario Act, BUILD stands for Building Universal and Inclusive Land Development. And this would legalize 4 units or 4plexes on every lot that is already zoned for residential homes in Ontario. And it does this, we talk about legalizing housing. The way it would do this specifically is by amending the Planning Act. And you know how I love to talk about the Planning Act.
I do.
But basically, it would restrict municipal powers so that they could not impose some of the conditions that we have seen them use in the past to stall the application of new, or the application for permits to build new homes.
We like to give credit where it's due, and I guess we should therefore say that this sounds an awful lot like a plan that the Green Party of Ontario brought forward not too long ago. Both bills, the Liberal one and the Green one, play with the idea of building quadplexes or 4plexes, whatever you want to call them, on residential lots by cutting a lot of red tape. Again, pick up the story if you would.
Yeah, they both approach the same goal with slightly different strategies. And, we know, you can remember going back to, I want to say 2006 or 7, the Ontario Liberal government under Dalton McGuinty then brought in policies to allow basement suites that were supposed to be legalized all over Ontario. But what they found was, in the face of provincial law, municipalities just said things like, well, okay, you can have a basement suite, but you have to put 3 parking spaces in if you do. And obviously nobody was going to do that.
Defeats the purpose.
And so that experience, I think, is informing some of what we're seeing here, where people are proposing laws to really take some of those tools away from municipalities. We did reach out to Mike Schreiner because this bill really has a similar aim. And he wrote back saying, quote, "I'm glad that the Liberals now see the benefits of legalizing housing, and I hope they will join me in pushing for more kinds of gentle density by adopting our calls for 6 to 11 stories on transit corridors as well." So we've got some agreement on 4 stories. Mike wants to raise the ceiling, so to speak.
I got to say, that's a very Mike Schreiner kind of answer, where he says, I did have a good idea, and I am happy to have you steal it if it kind of moves or advances the issue along. Now, come to think of it, there's actually a lot of thievery going on at Queen's Park these days, because one of the interesting things about this Liberal bill, just unveiled this week, is that it steals some of its ideas from the Progressive Conservative government's own housing task force. And I'm trying to think now, who rejected some of the ideas that were in the Progressive Conservatives' own housing task force?
That would be the Progressive Conservative government itself.
That's right. I think you're right about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the task force brought its report forward just before the 2022 election, and the government wasn't going to, let's say, demonstrate the conviction of this potentially unpopular idea right before an election, but they also haven't really done anything with it since. And so the Premier clearly believes that this idea is too controversial. Homeowners and municipalities as well don't like the idea of having these powers taken away from them. In fact, we know this is the case because the Premier was asked about Crombie's proposal on Thursday at a press conference in Richmond Hill, made it very clear that the government will not be considering this.
Well, I can tell you one thing. I heard that announcement from Bonnie Crombie, and I can assure you 1,000%, you go in the middle of communities and start putting up 4-story, 6-story, 8-story buildings, and right deep into the communities, there's going to be a lot of shouting and screaming. That's a massive mistake. We are not going to go into communities and build 4-story or 6-story buildings beside residents like this. It's off the table for us.
Well, the government has railed against so-called NIMBYs, not in my backyard, getting in the way of new homes built. But in that clip, the Premier seems to be siding with the NIMBYs, while at the same time, I think in fairness, we should say, offering significant incentives as well to municipalities to get homes built. So, on the one hand, on the other hand, what's going on here?
Yeah, we'll talk about the incentives in a minute, but we've seen this tug of war within the government for some time now. I mean, certainly you could trace this line going well back before the last election, where there are people, I mean, we mentioned the task force, but also people like Tim Hudak at the Ontario Real Estate Association, who a former PC party leader, not an enemy of this government by any means, but they put out a report earlier this year also arguing for legalizing fourplexes. And there are definitely people within the party and within the broader conservative movement who want to see the government move on this. But clearly the Premier is listening to, let's say, more cautious voices who are worried about the very reasonable prospect of voters not being happy with the sight of lots of new homes going up in otherwise stable neighborhoods.
Understood. All right, on to issue 3. Well, yesterday morning we had dueling news conferences. At 9 a.m., both the Premier and a few of his cabinet ministers went up to Richmond Hill, and the Liberal leader and her finance critic all made announcements related to next Tuesday's annual Ontario budget. Let's touch on Doug Ford's announcement first. He's announced $1.8 billion in funding for municipalities to help build infrastructure, to help support home building in the province.
Altogether, our government is investing $3 billion in housing enabling infrastructure. And I think that's probably the most I've ever heard in the history of this province. $3 billion to help municipalities like Richmond Hill get shovels in the ground to build more homes.
Doug Ford in Richmond Hill. Okay, we got some pretty big numbers there. You want to go into some of the details?
So we have $1 billion that will be dedicated to a new municipal housing infrastructure program, and then more than $500 million for what they are calling the Housing Enabling Water Systems Fund. One of my little rules of covering provincial politics is that if you want to talk about a significant announcement, the threshold is $1 billion or more. Mm-hmm. Anything less than that might be interesting. It might be important. It might be a very worthwhile Canadian initiative. But if you want to talk about significant policy change, for me, I would say the floor starts at $1 billion, and this qualifies. This is, nearly $2 billion in money. In terms of the details of the policy, I think, I think I've said this before on the podcast. People need to remember that a house is not just four walls and a roof. It is connected to all sorts of infrastructure that it needs to be connected to, right? Water, sewer, electricity, roads. And if you don't have those connections, or if those connections are delayed, or if the costs of those infrastructure projects get passed on to new home builders and potentially customers for those new homes, that can stall home building. It can make home building more expensive. So the fact that the government is proposing to pay for this stuff out of what seems to be general revenues that we don't on this program yet, $2 billion, that could get a lot of sewer and water projects built. And it's specifically being targeted to places where, there are approved developments waiting for the sewers to get built, the water pipes to get filled, that kind of thing.
So it should be a game changer.
Well,
should be.
Here's hoping.
Right.
I don't think we can overstate just how dire the housing crisis is and the need to really get those shovels in the ground. The last year of housing starts in Ontario has been kind of underwhelming. And so $2 billion is good. I think a lot of people would tell you that you probably need to bring that up even further.
Well, let's see what next Tuesday's budget has to say about all
indeed.
of that. Anyway, the Liberals responded to that announcement by the PCs pretty quickly, though, didn't they?
They did, because, of course, when Doug Ford did, at this press conference, rule out the idea of fourplexes everywhere, the Liberals sent out a news release responding to it saying, quote, "This is a NIMBY government that only cares about looking out for their rich friends and well-connected insiders."
Ouch.
Yeah, no, tough talk.
Tough talk.
One of those things that you see a lot in politics is the speed with which somebody can throw the counterpunch is something that I watch for, and the Liberals not letting that one wait too long.
Well, Ford and Crombie are both scrappers, so we'll see more of this to come, I'm sure. In the meantime, Bonnie Crombie did hold her third news conference of the week, as we suggested, yesterday morning, 9 o'clock in the morning. Alongside her was Stephanie Bowman, the MPP for Don Valley West, the finance critic for the Liberals, and they were laying out some of their ideas for what they want to see in next Tuesday's budget. Let's have a look.
Our agenda is simple acceptance of abundance. And we will achieve our vision through strong action to attract jobs and through careful stewardship of the budget. We do not see that strong action with this Conservative government. We do not see careful management of the budget either. Instead, we see dithering and delays, failures and flip-flops, and scandals.
Now, Crombie noted that when she was the mayor of Mississauga, she never ran deficits.
Yes.
While that is true, we should remind everybody that no municipality is allowed by law to run a deficit. So, yes, it's true, but come on.
Yes.
Okay, pick up the story again if you would.
Doug Ford has also never declared war on another country, something he does not have the power to do. So
that is true. So, yes.
But this was, an opportunity for Bonnie Crombie to, make sure that the Liberal Party got its foot in the door for the budgetary news cycle. We know that the budget is coming next Tuesday, and it's natural that the government is going to suck up a lot of the oxygen for a few news cycles. And this was an opportunity for the Liberals to say, well, actually, here's what we want to see in the budget. They had already announced a tax measure that this was the day before, they announced a tax measure for recreation, basically a tax break for families, a non-refundable tax credit for things like kids' sports and music lessons and those kinds of extracurriculars.
Do you remember the last government in this country that brought forward an idea like that?
I mean, to me, it sounded like a very Stephen Harper thing.
Exactly. I mean, this is what's so hilarious about so many of these policies. You know, we think there are these magnificent differences among the party stripes. And in fact, this is a pure ripoff from something Stephen Harper brought in when he was Conservative Prime Minister of Canada.
I mean, it was also extremely popular.
It was,
Stephen
for
Harper.
sure.
So,
yeah.
Don't knock the Liberals for chasing popular policy, I guess.
I'm not knocking the politics of it, but I'm just, I think I've said it before. There's nothing new under the sun. And when Liberals start stealing policies from Conservatives, I notice.
Yes,
that's all.
Absolutely.
Anyway, anything else on this?
No, I mean, I think it's an interesting example of... I'm not a huge fan of these like boutique tax credits. I think that it ends up being kind of small ball in a way. But see, that was a sports metaphor. We're going to talk about that later.
More to come later.
But I do think that, as we say, it was a really popular measure when Stephen Harper brought it in, and I can see why the Liberals are bringing it forward. And we will see, of course. I mean, there's a long way between now and the next election, so we'll see what comes of it.
2.5 years. Okay, on to your column, my column. All right, it's time now for the regular feature we call Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I reminisce about the columns that we wrote for the TVO website over this past week. JMM, what struck your fancy?
Well, so we've actually already heard this phrase in one of the clips that we used earlier, but I wrote a bit about the Liberal housing policy announcement that we've already talked about, but Bonnie Crombie has been using a phrase a lot lately, an abundance agenda. And, I think the use of that phrase and some of the Liberals who I've spoken to about it, tell me this is going to be the really central lens that they view all of their policy development through over the next few years. And so I think it tells us a bit about where she is taking the Liberal Party. When she won the Liberal leadership race, I don't think you necessarily, and this is not like a knock against her. I think it's natural that you didn't have like a ton of clarity about all of her policy ambitions, because that's not how leadership races go generally. But I think there's some interesting stuff happening in sort of inside the Liberal Party and its movement, if I can use that word, and what they really want their next shot at government to be. And she talks about wanting affordable housing, but not just affordable housing, but like really accessible education and healthcare and these things as frankly, like, not too different from some of the themes that Doug Ford has talked about, but you can see this disagreement over fourplexes really tells you can go a lot of different ways with the idea of abundance. So,
gotcha. An abundance agenda.
The abundance agenda is a phrase you are going to be hearing a lot of from the Liberals over the next little bit.
Good.
What about yourself, Steve?
I want to talk about this guy. That button's more than 40 years old. That's from an election campaign more than 4 decades ago for a candidate in Eglinton riding by the name of Roy McMurtry. First it was Brian Mulroney, and now this week, the death of another Tory titan. I guarantee you, look, I have no poll to base this on, other than my own. I think I'm right about this. Asked 99 out of 100 Ontarians today who is the Attorney General of the province, and I don't think they're going to come up with Doug Downey's name. No offense to him, it's just a different time.
Yeah.
4 decades ago, if you asked the same question, I guarantee you a lot of people would have known that the Attorney General in the province of Ontario was a guy named Roy McMurtry. He was the AG from 1975 to 85, 10 years. And people knew his name because he was involved in a hell of a lot of controversial issues. In fact, he got the nickname Roy McHeadline because his name was in the paper so often in the headlines related to controversial issues. I'll give you a couple here. I mean, he cared a great deal about hockey. He played hockey into his 50s, and he really loved the sport. And this was at a time in the middle 1970s when The Broad Street Bullies, as the Philadelphia Flyers were then known, won a couple of Stanley Cups by playing, let's call it what it was, goon hockey. I mean, just out-and-out fights and mayhem and goonery. And the Flyers came to Maple Leaf Gardens for one game, and it got so out of hand that McMurtry had the cops lay charges against a couple of members of the Philadelphia Flyers, because what they did was, frankly, I think his line at the time was, if you tried that off the ice, never mind on the ice, you'd be charged with assault. Right. So, needless to say, the papers had a great time with that one. There was another occasion. Let me tell you something. If you go into the justice system of the province of Ontario today, you can get a trial in French, if French is your first language, because of Roy McMurtry. And the way he brought that policy in was fascinating. He didn't tell the Premier. Bill Davis was the Premier. He didn't tell him. He just unilaterally announced it without going through Cabinet and without going through his Premier.
Can you imagine that today?
No, you can't. But Mr. McMurtry believed that it was the right thing to do, and I remember him telling me, there's no way I'd be able to get this through Cabinet, so I just did it, and I thought if the Premier wants to fire me, he can, but I don't think he will. And he didn't. And in fact, we now have a bilingual court system, thanks to Roy McMurtry's political courage, which, as Mr. Davis would have said, definitely tested the core of the Tory party. But there it is. He got it done.
Now, I mean, that window of his career as Attorney General, that certainly was a tumultuous time in terms of like constitutional negotiations. I have to assume he had a big role there.
Massive, and absolutely true. Remember 1980, Pierre Trudeau comes back after that interregnum where he was out of power for a little while. He comes back pledging to repatriate the Constitution with an accompanying Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Big constitutional conference negotiations in Ottawa in the Government Conference Centre in late 1981, I think. And the lore goes, I mean, it's as with all lore, it's not 100% true, but it's a great story. The lore goes that the three big attorneys general of the country at that time, Jean Chrétien for the Feds, Roy McMurtry for Ontario, Roy Romano for Saskatchewan, got together in a little kitchenette in the Government Conference Centre and essentially discussed and hammered out an agreement which turned out to be ultimately what we went for, right? Repatriated Constitution with a charter. And what was amazing about those guys was Jean Chrétien, Liberal from rural Quebec, Romano, New Democrat from Saskatchewan, McMurtry, kind of landed gentry, Upper Canada College, University of Toronto, progressive conservative from Ontario. Yeah. They all had nothing personally in common other than a love of Canada, and to use the parlance of today, they got it done. Mr. McMurtry went on to become the highest-ranking judge in the province of Ontario. He was the Chief Justice of the highest court. One of his most historic decisions was legalizing gay marriage in the province of Ontario. He was a huge presence in Bill Davis's government, and I, out of the blue, just by dumb luck, called him about 2.5 weeks ago, and I said, can I come over and talk to you about something? I wanted to get his opinion about the like-minded judges stuff that's going on right now.
Right.
And he did tell me, not for publication, but what the hell, I'm going to tell you now. He was very much opposed to it, and he did not like the idea.
Right.
But I went over to visit him. Turned out he died a week and a half after my visit, and so I, just had this picture taken of the two of us, did a little selfie here, which I'm really glad I have as a memento to that last visit. We had numerous visits over the years. I really enjoyed going over to talk to him and see him because I love the old stories and he loved to tell them. Roy McMurtry was 91 years old and a real legend.
And one of the only bits of trivia that I know about McMurtry, that he's actually one of I think either the only or one of the only people to ever hold both the Attorney General and Solicitor General posts at the same time.
Not only is that true, but he's also one of two people in 156 years of Ontario history to have been both Attorney General and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Ontario. Two people, him and Dana Porter, who you may know his son, Julian Porter.
Oh, okay.
Julian Porter,
yeah,
married to Anna Porter, the author. Anyway, his dad, Julian Porter's dad, Dana Porter, in the 40s and 50s, was also Attorney General, Chief Justice of the High Court. So he's in pretty select company, that Roy McMurtry. He sure was.
And with that, we are going to go to the mailbag.
Okay, you know our email address. It's onpolitics@tvo.org. We like getting your emails and your questions and comments. Start us off this week, JMM.
Here is a question from listener Pratik Sarma, who lives on the Danforth in Toronto. Solidarity EastEnders. Pratik writes, hi, On Politics podcast team. I'm a longtime listener, first-time writer.
Hear, hear.
I was wondering if you could give us an explainer on why different levels of government are allowed to have completely different levels of debt. I don't understand why cities can't be in the red while our provinces are always in the red and no one cares. Some people care. The finance minister cares. Meanwhile, the federal government gets constantly called out for being in the red. Please explain. Thank you in advance. Sincerely, Pratik Sarma.
Okay, that one's got your name all over it. Go ahead, take a stab at it.
Right. So municipalities can incur some debts, but only for generally capital projects, right? They still need to balance their operating budget every year, and they aren't allowed to assume debt to pay for regular expenses over the long term. And there are also limits to just how much debt they're allowed to accrue overall. So just if you aren't hip to operating in capital budget lingo, the analogy here would be if the province of Ontario was allowed to take on debt to build hospitals, but was not allowed to go into debt to pay nurses and doctors. So that's basically the rule that we impose on municipalities. The provincial government imposed these rules on municipalities. It's a legacy of the Great Depression when not just municipalities, but some provinces were flirting with bankruptcy. And so it is designed to keep municipalities from going into bankruptcy, the kind of thing that we saw south of the border with Detroit, which was, I believe, the largest municipal bankruptcy in that country's history not too long ago.
And the feds and the provinces are allowed to go into debt for operational purposes because?
Because the Constitution doesn't say they can't. Basically, we have inherited a system where we basically let the federal and provincial governments do anything that they are not outright prohibited from, and that includes they can spend into deficit. But municipalities, as we've said several times, they are creatures of the province. They only have the powers that provincial law gives them. And so the province, in its wisdom, has imposed these controls on municipalities.
Gotcha. Okay, I love this next one. Here is an email from a listener named Stuart Cowan, and it is a continuation of the story that I told, God, was it 4 years ago or 4 weeks ago? It feels like a long time ago. A continuation about this story about the demolition of the West Toronto Railway Station, which did take place 4 decades ago. And viewers have been adding to this story week after week after week after week. So I think it's kind of adorable, actually.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. So here's Stuart writing, saying, Steve and JMM, one additional fact to share, if you can tolerate more train lore. While walking through the junction today, I passed a mural that I have seen hundreds of times. This time, it caught my attention. It depicts the very CPR West Toronto rail station that was demolished in 1982. Attached is a picture of the mural located on the northwest corner of Dundas Street and Pacific Avenue. You will see that the artist has added the label West Toronto Station in the top left. So while the building may be gone, the memory of this CPR rail station lives on, albeit in mural form. This may close the book on this rail tale. Cheers, Stuart Cowan from Toronto. That is fabulous. I hope it doesn't close the chapter on it. I guess we should note that the destruction of this station, along with a few others, eventually led to the creation of the Heritage Railway Stations Protection Act of 1985. That's a federal law that requires government approval for any changes made to an existing station.
Yeah, I also hope this is not the end of people sending in lovely tips and facts about trains. We have learned quite a bit from our listeners and our viewers, and I really think that's wonderful. Again, who doesn't love being able to explain the interaction between municipal and provincial and federal laws?
Exactly, we live for it.
Yeah, it's a shame that building was destroyed, but it has lived on in this podcast now.
Right on.
One final email from listener Brian Lewis, who writes, "Did I really see JMM use a sports metaphor in a recent article on TVO.org?
Shocking.
I'm reading an article entitled, 'Once Again, the Tories committed an unforced error before conceding the inevitable.' Isn't unforced error a tennis term? If Steve ever needs someone to come on the show and talk about the Hamilton Tiger Cats or the provincial economy, I'm your guy. I hope the great work on the On Poly podcast."
I'm wondering, is that the same Brian Lewis who used to be a referee in the National Hockey League? I'm wondering, because I know a Brian Lewis who used to be a referee in the NHL and who I believe was a municipal councillor in one of the municipalities in the GTA. I want to say Milton, I think. I wonder if that's him. I don't know. Matthew, find out, and then we'll confirm next week. Anyway, Brian, thanks for those kind words. And JMM, I'm beyond delighted that my obsession with sports seems to be finally rubbing off that much on you.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to disappoint you or Brian, but the dirty little secret is I did not write that headline.
Breaking my heart, kid.
I did
Breaking my
understand it, but I did not write it.
All right. On politics at TVO.org. I'm going to say the email this week because whenever I ask you to say it in the past, you always kind of scratch your head and say...
I flip it, and I can never remember. My brain is not wired to remember that email address for some reason.
On politics at TVO.org. There we go.
Okay.
Good stuff. All right. And just a reminder, next week, budget special. Budget special next Friday for the podcast. So make sure you tune in for that. And with that, we say bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
This weekend, Saturday and Sunday evening, TVO is bringing you our telethon. As we prepare for 2 nights of special programming, special guests, and some TVO fan favorites, we're giving you a sneak peek at what we have in store. Have a look.
So my name is Dr. Deborah Hart, and I'm with Brock University, and I'm a faculty and academic member in the Department of Educational Studies. I particularly work with really young children, so, birth to about grade 3. And when you think about young children and how they learn, it's all through curiosity.
When I was growing up, I thought a fish was asleep, babe.
They're curious about the world. They want to explore the world. They want to touch and feel and make sense of the world. So it's just a natural element of being in the world.
How does it look today? Is it moving fast? Is it moving slow? What do you think?
Fast.
Fast.
It just makes sense to really examine curiosity and then blend it with the outdoors and think about what is it about the outdoors that offers really specific and kind of unbounded opportunities for curiosity to blossom for young children. So one of their programs is a forest Hindi program. I brought this idea to them several years ago because I really wanted to kind of bring that idea of forest school to our campus. And they're great to partner with. They're always game to try out new and exciting kind of pedagogical principles. So they were really engaged with the idea of letting the forest kind of lead children's learning.
What kind of animals are in danger if we're in a forest fire? You don't know.
Deers.
Deers, yeah.
I'm going to bump into you.
In our forest? Do we have lions in our forest?
Yes.
Come on.
Tricked ya.
I know you tricked me.
So again, be out immersed in the woods, letting children have the agency to kind of follow their interests, develop all of holistically because, you're out there, you're watching them, they're engaged physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, as well as, their thinking skills and their cognitive skills. So they were really a great group to partner with because they really believed in the philosophy. They really believed in reconnecting children to nature. And we have a beautiful campus in Niagara for Brock University. We have a very unique kind of biosphere right there that the children could really engage with and learn about. And Rosenblauer was very vested from the very get-go. They were very interested in the idea.
I'm Suzanne Robitaille. I'm a registered early childhood educator and a forest school practitioner. So today we have set up some art, so painting with watercolor paints, and we have a tether line for balance and core strength. And we also have some tree blocks that we made ourselves and some little fairy dolls for dramatic play.
I'm not even falling this
Oh, you're doing great. Right till the word stops. We have an interesting split this year. It's 5 girls and 3 boys. So the dramatic play things like fairy dolls are big for girls. But they all kind of enjoy it and they all like to do art. The tether rope is kind of a new thing that we're trying out. As the year progresses, we get to do more and more risk-inspired things. Sometimes they just get an idea in their head.
It's gonna rain.
Maybe later, yeah. Yesterday we stopped and listened to the birds and tried to see different ones because they're starting to come back. So it all depends on what they notice, what they see. When we had the snow, there was tons of tracks from different animals, so that really inspired them. The walk was very long to get here because we had to stop for every track and decipher if it was a dog or a coyote or if it was a mouse or a vole. Like, it was fun.
I think what's really beneficial about the forest is that it is so open. So it's not bounded. Like, there's no scripts out there. So if you think about a toy, typically a toy is defined by an adult. It's created with some expectations. You know, a truck looks like a truck. Children tend to play with it like a truck. But if you think of a stick or a pine cone or a tree even, there's no embedded expectations of what that could be. So for children, you know, it just kind of unleashes their imagination and curiosity. The stick can be absolutely anything. We've seen it as, you know, a magic wand, a seatbelt, a dump truck. It can be part of their walls that they build when they build their den. So there's just something about the outdoors that it's not scripted. You know, the materials are typically loose parts that they can manipulate any which way they want. And it really fosters that opportunity for kids to be, you know, follow their interests, but, you know, and really kind of use their curiosity to kind of direct their activities. I think that we should place more of an emphasis on curiosity. You know, children should have a chance when they're learning to really use their questions. So they have questions about the world, they have questions of how things work, they have questions about, you know, why is this hill deteriorating after the rain. So those are the kind of things that we want to tap into as educators. So we have the children's inquiry questions and we follow their leads based on their curiosity. Because what happens with curiosity is part of the cycle of, you know, inquiry. Yes, they're curious, they have questions, but really when you think about it, it's almost like the scientific method. They, you know, come up with hypotheses, you know, why does this work? Why is this puddle here? Those types of things. They test out their theories, they come to a conclusion, and they kind of deepen their learning through this kind of inquiry cycle.
Usually the kids pick everything that they want to do. So I offer suggestions. Whether or not they follow my suggestions is another story. You guys are playing lava?
Now we're playing
Firefighters now? What kind of fire? What kind of fire? A building fire, a forest fire? A forest fire? Oh my goodness. Quite often we have votes on where to go in this forest because we have a lake. So sometimes we go there, sometimes we choose a hike instead of camp. So we get to try different things. And the kids are the ones that make the choices and do the voting. Once upon a time on this land called lived the
First Nations people.
They learn a lot about teamwork. They learn a lot about the environment. We do the land acknowledgement every time we come out, and they are learning to respect the land. Sometimes I learn about different animals from them because they dig things up that I wouldn't dig up. I love bugs, but I'm not one for the slimy stuff. So we've learned about all different kinds of salamanders while we've been here. Each kid is different and you just learn something different from them. It's kind of neat. They have brilliant minds and brilliant questions, and it's fun just to follow, and I don't give them the answers. We usually just make theories on their ideas and how things happen and why things happen. If they're really determined that they need to know the exact why, when we go back, we'll go on the tablet and we'll search it up on Google and see what it is, that kind of thing. But usually they make their own choices, they make their own ideas, and they just figure it out.
I think the other aspect of curiosity is it's kind of coupled with creativity. So there's this wonderful thing that happens, you know, creative solutions, problem solving. And so there's this really nice kind of nexus that happens if we really focus on the children's curiosity, and then we allow them the space and the time to come up with these creative solutions. And that's what we need in the world. We need creative solutions going forward.
I think it's a great program, and I think kids learn a lot. I know I learn different things each year from the children because each year is different. So I think if a child gets an experience to do this, I think they really should.
Hi, I'm Lanika. I'm in grade 11, and my question today is, what are some tips and tricks that youth can use to help manage stress and anxiety? I'm because I'm a youth, and with applying to universities and dealing with stress in school with exams, I just wanted to know if there was any steps I could be taking to help manage the anxiety I'm feeling.
My name is Jan Arden, and I'm a musician, and I'm a writer and a podcaster. That is a really, really great question. What can you do as a youth, anybody for that matter, to deal with stress and anxiety? And there is so many decisions that we have to make on a daily basis, and especially when, like you said, you're looking at making decisions about colleges and universities and what direction you're going to take in your life. I can honestly say it's really small things. It's not big things that are going to make a difference in your mental health. And I think that's why it can become kind of daunting, because you think, oh, I've got to make all these changes. I love listening to music. I love reading poetry. I find that if I find a playlist that I can either have, with me with my little earphones in when I'm walking, that combination of walking, moving, fresh air, sunshine, listening to music, and make sure you're not listening too loud so that you can hear what's going on around you, the traffic and everything. But those are things that have really, really been helpful to me. And I have learned over the years to lean on my friends and to talk to them and to tell them that I'm struggling or that I'm worried about something. And I think a lot of us are very reluctant to keep things to ourselves when we feel worried and stressed out. So hopefully that helps. Seems like small things, but for me, they've made all the difference in the world to my mental health and my stress level in my life.
Well, let's start. And what about this? A media literacy course in high school. In my view, that should have been in place a long time ago. Secondly, there's so much out there on social media, and so much of it is, frankly, just garbage. You can't believe it. Look at the hoaxes that were floating around about the moon landing being a hoax, 9/11 being a hoax, and that was supposedly backed up by authorities, good information, and it was all nonsense. Because there is evidence, hard evidence, to the contrary, of course. So my best advice on this would be to go for the institutions you grew up with and learn to trust, like TVO, like CBC, CTV, National Systems, Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, what have you, your local paper. Because there you get journalism that is verified by credible journalists who moderate it, and they are careful about what they publish, what they put out. You can be sure that facts are facts, not alternative facts, but real facts. That's point 2. Point 3 is that I think you should take seriously being a good citizen, because you're a voter. You're going to have to make decisions about things. I know that sounds maybe boring, but it's a job that every citizen in a democracy has to take seriously if you want to get the government. You know, we say we get the government we deserve. Well, we get the government we vote for. So please keep that in mind.
My name is Steve Jordans. I'm a professor of psychology here at the University of Toronto, Scarborough. Academics are all about learning, all about discovering new things, and curiosity is really the force that drives all of that. And so understanding that driving force, how it works, and how we can harness it is a big part of what we do.
And they would go through all of and say, for every million words, how many of them are sustainability?
When we're thinking, what is curiosity-driven learning? How can we actually express that in a psychological way? We often think back to the work of Blooma Zygarnik. Blooma was very famous for saying, the mind does not like unfinished business. Anytime we get part of a story but we don't get the conclusion, we crave to know that conclusion. And so the mind keeps coming back to that. And that's really what curiosity typically is. We typically get a germ of something, enough to make us think, huh? And then we want to get the rest of that story, where the mind does not like just stopping there. The really important thing to understand about curiosity is the mind hates unfinished business. And so if you start to introduce something, or if you catch their mind, but then don't complete that thought or that idea, then they want to keep thinking about it more. And so in the classroom, we'll often begin a class with something that's meant to induce curiosity, something that's supposed to grab their mind and make them wonder, how is that happening? And then we don't tell them. Because one of the things I'm going to try to do is to induce some curiosity, get you thinking about something. And I don't want you just to resolve that curiosity. I don't want you just to go find the answer too quick. I want you to kind of carry that through the lecture. And then by the end of the lecture, then I would like to resolve that curiosity and show you how it all fits together. So in the classroom, what we'll often do is begin the class by trying to induce familiarity. And we do that by telling, part of a story that is perhaps unexpected or surprising to them, but we don't tell them the whole story. We tell them enough to get them thinking, how could that work? And then we just leave it, and we go through a lecture where we talk about things that once they all stack up and come together, they explain that thing we talked about in the beginning. So in the meantime, the students are trying to figure out, how does this all fit? And it's an approach we use to keep them engaged, to kind of keep their phones on the table and their eyes on us and their ears on us. And hopefully that makes for a better lecture experience for them. And it certainly does for us, because we have their attention, and that's what's important. Let's start with that headline. Father ruled insane in boy's decapitation. Wow, this sounds like a conspiracy theory kind of thing, doesn't it? So this is a sort of story that I want you to understand is out there, and I want you to think about this. Kind of think about it sort of like a detective, but like a detective that understands the brain and is trying to understand what possibly could be happening in a person's mind and a person's brain for this sort of behavior. So, Louisiana.
It was just so engaging, and it kept me hooked till the very end, because I really wanted to know what he was hiding from so long. So I think that kept me curious. When I came to know the syndrome, I finally had the peace in my head. I was like, oh, thank God, finally I know what it was all along. But I think, then I felt this satisfaction in my head that, oh, finally, I was curious all along. Now I'm calm and composed, and now I know what it was. So.
How do you work against students following their curiosity on their screens?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. So we're competing, and that's one of the things we have to learn about technology now, that every student has something that's right in front of them trying to pull their mind out of the lecture. And if we don't compete with that, if we present sort of a boring, traditional style lecture, we're going to lose. And so that's really what curiosity is about, to an extent, is trying to say, hey, what's going on in here is more interesting than what's going on there. And it's worth your time to kind of plug in and pay attention. And the best way to do that is to get them wondering about something, get them thinking, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. How could that be? And so that's a good way to actually put it, is curiosity is our way of competing with technology.
Are you tempted to look at your phone?
I was tempted. I did turn it off and put it in my bag because I know, I've been in his AO1 class, so I know he has a very interactive class. So I knew something was coming, but I was tempted, yeah.
He is a very interactive professor, but what he does very differently in comparison to a lot of my other professors is that he doesn't really start with a list of objectives for the lesson. So instead, he actually focuses more on a problem or an interaction that he can have with students. And so students can start thinking about what the topic may be, or how we must be able to find an ends mean for it. And so it kind of just brings you along a journey. And so he connects all the slides together. and it really does create more of like a storytelling point of view rather than just like, this is what this lecture's about.
Once curiosity kicks in, they're not learning now because they want to get an A or because there's some sort of reward, some sort of external thing they're chasing. They're learning now because they want to know. And that sort of learning, that sort of intrinsically driven curiosity is the most powerful form of learning there is. Now, as they're learning, as they're finding out things, it's important to them. It's putting a puzzle together. They're starting to get pieces of this puzzle, and so every piece becomes a little more valuable. And you know, as they put together that puzzle, and so that's really why we like it. You can say, "Hey, listen, students, and maybe you'll get an A." That's what we call extrinsic rewards. Or we can say, "What do you think is going on here? Isn't this weird?" And that is a whole different kind of mindset and a much more powerful one for learning.
There you have it, a sneak peek of what's to come this weekend here on TVO. We've got a jam-packed weekend for you. This telethon's theme is curiosity and how the crucial element of learning at all ages and stages of life fuels Ontarians. Notable Ontarians and celebrities will endeavor to answer burning questions submitted by curious kids and grown-ups alike. We'll debut the new season of the series Crossroads, Beyond Boom and Bust. Have a preview of our new series, New World Beat, and feature the Oscar-nominated documentary To Kill a Tiger. That's here on TVO, Saturday, March 23rd, Sunday, March 24th, from 6:30 p.m. through midnight. You can watch us on the broadcast or stream both days on our YouTube channel, TVO Today mobile app, or our telethon website. And here it is, telethon.tvo.org. And you can donate on that website now, too. We hope you can join us. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a great evening, everyone, and I'll see you here tomorrow for the TVO Telethon.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Next week on The Agenda.
That was one of the things we talked to caucus about, was should we delay this? And it was as significant, I think, for us, given the political brand, as it was for you and the Premier, when you had to say, you know, we're going to break a promise, we're going to delay tax cuts a year, which in the time was seen as an incredible revolutionary thing.
That's next week on The Agenda. The Agenda is always on. To catch up on conversations from this week or any week, visit our website, tvo.org/theagenda, or our YouTube page at youtube.com/theagenda. It's all there for whenever you want to watch.
Helping Ontarians thrive through learning is at the heart of what TVO does. But that doesn't mean learning can't be fun. Join TVO on March 23rd and 24th